A livery is the public face of the railway. I'd wager when you think of a railway, their colour scheme is perhaps the strongest part of the identity of that railway in your mind. At the same time, liveries have been used since the very beginning to indicate the job of a train. Two trains of the same type could be painted two distinct ways, specifically to indicate one serves purpose A, whilst the other serves purpose B. Take an otherwise colourful locomotive, paint it jet black, and that's pretty much the universal signal that it has become a freight engine. Indeed, a livery usually goes hand in hand with a railway's corporate identity. But in the grand scheme of things, unified corporate identities don't tend to last long. In Europe at least. I'm sure there's plenty of workers surfing the Union Pacific Railroad that are mighty proud of their yellow livery turning 100 years old in a few years. To date this video, it was recorded in June 2026. One only has to realise that the Deutsche Bahn's vibrant red only came about as a universal livery in 1997. London and North Eastern Railway's current identity of white and red only came about once the Azumas were pressed into service in 2019. Before that, they had just adapted the Virgin Trains livery sans branding. And the less said about the constant changing of detail differences in the old Great Western Railway livery, the better. And then there's NS. Their vibrant yellow and blue have, in some form or another, stood the test of time since 1968. But before yellow could prove it would last as long as it does, we have to go back. Back some 100 odd years. For before yellow, in the 1920s, there was green. After a short period of trialling a grass green on locomotives, the emerging livery became a dark green, sometimes referred to as olive green. This livery was applied indiscriminately, anything from express locomotives, electric multiple units, coaches, and even small shunters wore it. The first major deviation from that green came in 1934 with the introduction of the class DE3, which stands for Diesel 3. They were unpainted, retaining a mostly stainless steel look, with only red warning stripes at the head of each control car. This would, before long, give way to the olive green. Now in the 50s things get wild, so let's skip to 1951. NS had received their second order of electric locomotives by that time, their classes 1100 and 1200. These were delivered in a shade of green which borders on bluish-grey, although it was officially known as turquoise. Lighter shades were seen as clean and modern, so whilst the NS 1000s, on which I've made a video in the past, were still rocking the same olive green, there came these light blue, greenish, grey machines with colour-matching steel-bodied coaches. However, as you can probably tell, bright colours and an environment where steam locomotives still operate don't tend to mix, so as soon as 1956, the livery became Prussian blue. Even the NS 1000s and the aforementioned matching coaches were repainted into this blue. When the first NS-ordered diesel road locomotives arrived in 1954, the Whitcomb Road shunters do not count, they were by and large delivered in the shade of red, which would border on brown upon being subject to working conditions. The curious exception to the rule were the NS 2600s, which I have also covered before. These locomotives, already odd ones out among the Dutch diesel deposits, were mostly painted in the Prussian blue, despite that livery being mainly applied to electric locomotives. Out of 6 2600s built, half would carry the rad livery later in life: 2601, 2602 and 2606. EMUs, with the notable exception of the MAT 24s, would be repainted into a lighter shade of green starting from 1955, most comparable to the Southern Railway's malachite. One series of EMU though, the MAT 57, would never carry this bright green. Instead, the class would always wear the navy blue associated with the so-called Benelux trains. Trains which, deceptively, shuttled between the Netherlands and Belgium, completely ignoring Luxembourg. DMUs, meanwhile, went for a darker shade of azure in 1955, which would be applied to brand new stock as well as retroactively given to the DE3s. This blue wouldn't last long at all, but at least it outlasted steam locomotives of the NS, the last of which were carrying either a sad state of olive green or plain black, as was the case with the last of the 3900s. Instead, the azure would give way to red with cream whiskers in 1960. Those cream whiskers were first trialled in the 50s, but in 62 even the green EMUs received those embellishments. I, for one, vastly prefer the cream whiskers to the red front ends. Things would only remain as such for a short number of years. In 1968, as mentioned before, in an attempt to revitalise the corporate identity of NS and to do away with the mishmash of liveries across the board, NS introduced a makeover to their stations, their logo, and to their trains. Mat 54 number 359, by then a member of the most characteristic EMU class on the NS books, was repainted into bright yellow, with blue diagonal stripes halfway along the carriage and black whiskers, setting the trend which other EMUs were to follow, although this process was very slow, with the grand majority of the Plan 46s remaining in their now familiar green with cream whiskers. This yellow style would be carried through the turn of the century, the very last trains to carry this scheme being the DDM stock, which were withdrawn in 2019. Locomotives would not receive all over yellow just yet. Instead, starting with 1200 number 1208, these locomotives would be mostly grey, with yellow noses and a thick yellow line running between the cab doors, upon which was stickered the new NS logo, dubbed the fishhook. This style of livery would, with minor alterations, be applied to most NS locomotives upon overhaul or works visits. Again, there were exceptions, most notably the whole of the Class 1000s and a handful of 1100s never making it into this livery. The EM2s acquired second-hand from British Rail, meanwhile, would be delivered in the yellow-grey scheme upon being rolled out as the Class 1500 in 1968. Coaching stock went from Prussian blue to yellow with an ultramarine band running across window level. First-class carriages no longer being denoted via a yellow line just below the roof, but instead a second, thin blue line below the windows. Ultimately, this livery of coaching stock would result in the most common livery across NS metals, with the VIRM double-deckers and the ICM units still wearing an adaptation of this livery to this very day. Between the 60s and the 80s, things would mostly remain the same, with the occasional outlier being found in a coach, 1000 or 1100 still carrying Prussian blue. 1981 saw the start of a trend of locomotive liveries, as that year the first all-over yellow NS locomotives appeared in the form of the 1600s, which were in reality a barely changed Chemin de Fer Français class BB 7200. The later batch of NS 1700s would carry the exact same all-over yellow, with the scheme also being applied to the 1300s upon their overhauls in the early 80s. When NS was divided into a passenger division and a freight division in 1995, the newly formed NS Cargo introduced a familiar all-over red with white distinction of ownership. Small wonder that NS Cargo was a joint venture between NS and the DB. Currently, the venture has rebranded to just DB. In 2001, dedicated stopping trains, collectively known by then as Sprinters, were repainted into white with blue window bands and yellow doors, with the exception of the Mat 64. This remains the current livery for all NS stopping trains, including the Stadler Flirts, which run exclusively in the south. The aforementioned VIRMs of 1994 would shake things up by carrying a version of the standard coaching livery, some having this livery slightly adapted in 2016, when the class was partially modernised. As on these units, the blue band follows the contours of the doors and goes across the lower deck rather than the upper deck. Finally, we come to the most recent livery, and the way the new units will be delivered from now on. The flow scheme. The grey off the roof has made way for ultramarine, with a large logo stickered at the cab end of each unit, as well as a logo halfway along each carriage. Currently, the scheme is only carried by certain VIRMs and the last few of the new batch of Corredias. There are a few detail variations I did not mention, such as a one-off pink class 2400, the handful of Alstom blue 2400s, a few 1200s which were delivered in the same reddish-brown as the diesels, or the new stipulation of yellow front ends on all trains. Whilst I do think green is a good colour for a train no matter what way you slice it, I think NS is doing a great job of making their livery part of their global identity. All I'm saying is, if a crash course of NS liveries needs to be now 10 minutes long, it was certainly a messy road to success. But hey, if at first you don't succeed,